Welcome to another episode of The Consulting Curve, the community approach to clients and consulting. Brought to you each week by BizDrivers.biz, founded by Peter Selby, a trusted profit and growth advisory to companies and consultants around the world. Tune in each week and learn how you can take that journey from corporate to consulting. This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of The Consulting Curve with my good friend, Peter Selby. Peter, thanks for joining us again on this great podcast.
Pleasure, Kevin, as always.
Always look forward to these sessions, and we're getting deep in the details here in our series. That the overarching idea behind this whole series is really advising in the new economy, and everything that we've talked about kind of is just another aspect of that. And you know, the last episode we kind of segued from how to position yourself, how to do value positioning, when it comes to consulting or advising. And today we're going to kind of dive into a completely different, but yet very connected facet of what it looks like to advise the new economy, and that's leading technology. So Peter, talk about a little bit about, just lay a good foundation for us for this week.
Sure. So thanks, Kevin. And yeah, look, an interesting talk. I think we talked before about this all sits under the umbrella of the drivers of client value. The first part of that is obviously how to position the value that you can offer a customer. But once you've done that, you then need to be able to deliver some value, of course. And there are a bunch of different ways to do that. But today we're going to talk about technology. And the reason for that is not technology for technology's sake. In actual fact, business drivers over the years has shied right away from technology, because the profit and growth advisory that we do for people is around good business process. And sure, there are IT systems and things in any business, but from a consulting perspective, we didn't want to get into selling platforms that people live in to be able to do a business, because it often deflects people from the business process itself. So, and of course, if you use a technology to live in as a business, and I'm not suggesting you don't, but if one of the problems you face is constant updates, it's out of date as soon as you put it in, and technology is moving all the time. So from an advisory perspective, yeah, exactly. From an advisory perspective, we've always stayed away from that and focused around the business process. But in more recent times, there are some technologies out there at the moment in the market that can actually help businesses get better insights into what's going on around them. And as business advisors at the end of the day are there to give people better insights as part of the journey of getting better business outcomes, then I thought some of those might be worth a discussion today. Does that set the scene?
Absolutely. Great foundation. When you were talking, the kind of the idea that came to mind was like almost the tail wagging the dog. We get so wrapped up in the technology for the sake of technology itself that we kind of forget the purpose of, it's simply a tool to, as you mentioned, how do you get better business insights and outcomes? How do you arrive at that?
Yeah, and look, one of the common ones you see are businesses. Somebody in a business sees something they like in a technology world and say, right, we must have that. And then when you start to work with the company about what they're going to use it for, they don't really know, but they know that it'd be a nice thing to have. And dashboards are a good example of that. Some people might see some dashboards and we want something that looks like that. Well, what do you want to measure? Oh, yeah, I'm not sure. So, it's about having a strategy that requires a technology that's going to give you more insights, and then looking for the right sample of that technology that will give you the best outcome. So it really needs to start from the business requirements. Makes sense?
For sure. And when you first start working with a business, from an advising standpoint, when you're looking at, you're not only looking at their key outcomes and their key metrics, you're also looking at their processes. And when you are talking about technology, do you most often see in-house technology, or is this more off-the-shelf tech that people are kind of reaching for? I mean, what do you see in this space most often?
We see a mixture of off-the-shelf and homegrown. or even worse, off the shelf that's been heavily customized.
Right.
And the problem with doing that is when the off the shelf stuff's upgraded, your customized version isn't, and it slips further and further behind. So there are lots of examples of good practice and bad practice. But if I just set the scene about some of the bigger elements that technology can bring rather than the technology itself, that will sort of that will help explain this a bit. One of the common bits of technology that a good deal of companies now use is an integrated financials and operational system known as an ERP system that that really brings together the functional elements of the business, the functional activity, as well as the financial controls. ERP standing for Enterprise Resource Planning, which came from the earlier drive of materials resource planning that went through sort of the manufacturing scene in the 80s. But ERP platforms require good business process to function because they're not forgiving of mistakes. They have a process to follow, and they assume that you have good business process. A good example would be, I don't know how many times I've heard over the years, oh, geez, we put SAP through the business. Well, hopeless. Business came to a standstill. Well, the issue wasn't SAP at all. And in fairness to the German company, they do understand how to build enterprise resource planning platforms, but it does assume that you know what you're doing as a business and your business systems are sound. So what happens is people try and shoehorn in an ERP to poor process. And there's only one thing worse than poor process, and that's automated poor process.
Oh, wow.
Just get replicated automatically. I can give you a funny story in this tale. I once worked many, many years ago with a company. It was a steel making company, and they had put in a new ERP system, and they had automated some things they shouldn't have done. In fairness, it's one of the best implementations I've ever seen, but they automated a few things before double checking data. And I arrived there this day, and there was this pile of lime outside the furnace area where they melt the steel. And you use lime as part of the steel making process. And the lime pile was as big as the building. And what had been happening is somebody had the decimal placed in the wrong spot at the reorder point, and people kept ordering lime, and they were ordering it right through the night. And in the day, there was this. And the problem is if lime gets wet, it's useless. So if it rains, they're in trouble, right? So I mean, there's an element of common sense that goes this, where somebody had obviously spotted things were out of control and stopped the deliveries, but by then it was too late. So there's an example of automating bad processes, the worst thing a business can do. However, assuming that you have business process, technology can really help pull all that together. And another area that's starting to get a lot of focus, really started in the bigger corporations, but is starting to sort of filter down, is business intelligence. And business intelligence, exactly what it says, it's making intelligent business decisions through having accurate data. Bearing in mind that most businesses don't run on data. Most businesses run on experience and intuition. And quite often we go into an organization and find their data is telling them one thing and they're actually doing another. So having data-driven decisions makes a huge difference to a business, assuming you've got good data.
It's impossible without tech.
Well,
I mean,
it's possible to have good data without, I mean, some level of tech is required from a point of view. You need a computer system and some sort of financial system and operational system. But what I'm talking about is the tech that pulls all that together.
right.
So, you know, modern day business intelligence platforms will suck data from whatever data platforms a company's using to manage the business and bring it into visual data that's real time. So that enables companies to get out of this idea that, you know, this year's target, so last year's plus 5%, we'll split the year into quarters and see how we do each month. That's really too slow for the how fast markets move now. Companies need to get out of that monthly cycle to stay abreast of the markets. So business intelligence platforms can allow you to do that. And there are more and more solutions out there, and the price point's coming down all the time. So the sort of smaller and medium-sized enterprises that could never have afforded the investment can now do that. So that's a developing technology right now that's helping businesses get better insights.
It's interesting how many of these different components that we talk about each, every couple of weeks, every fortnight, are actually, I know by design, they're meant to integrate together. And how many of these pieces are designed to almost replicate the same processes, only they're doing their function kind of in that process. And when we're talking about, how technology comes into play, I know one thing that it does, and you mentioned earlier, is that, business intelligence through, better data and better decisions that you're making as a result of that. All of that, like we've talked about in earlier episodes, it's bringing clarity, to the process. It's speeding up the availability of good data to make good decisions. And just, it's interesting to see just how all of this works virtually hand in glove.
Yeah, look, it does. And having better insights at a business are no use to you if you don't do something with that. So, taking those better insights to improve your business process to get a business outcome is a natural step. But even if you go as far as having accurate data and it's visual, but you don't do anything different as a business as a result of it, there's little point in doing it in the first place. So there is kind of a process you follow, and hence why we're talking about technology that helps with insights.
Mm-hmm.
When we go into a business, or any consulting company goes into a business, they're looking for patterns, they're looking for data, they're looking for business systems, and looking to improve that one way or another. So there is data like business intelligence is an example that can really help with that. And there's also technology that can help with the operational delivery of a business from a functional perspective. So forget who supplies the platform. A bit like business intelligence is a wide scope approach of making decisions.
Right.
It's not tied to whoever's supplying the platform or what their dashboards look like or anything else. Similarly, artificial intelligence and a thing called robotic process automation, RPA, is another area that's starting to move into business. And again, as usual, starts with the bigger corporates because it's expensive when it starts and then filters down through organizations. And this is where, again, it requires good data, but this is where transferring data from one part of a business to another, like for instance, to process a wage transfer or to process an invoice or something like that, can be done automatically rather than have a person do it. Mm-hmm. You can have a thing called a bot that sits inside a platform that reads the data, takes the data from one area to another, and the AI learning side of it can, it can learn things. It can learn handwriting and things like that. It's amazing, really. And banks use this extensively, and insurance companies at the moment, where they have zillions of transactions that happen every day. And if they use bots to do it, there's two things that happen. They drastically reduce errors because the data that's there is there. It's not someone's interpretation of that data that is then taken from somewhere and put somewhere else. And every time that happens, there's an opportunity for an error. So it drastically reduces errors, but also the utilization. If you think about it, a bot's working 24/7 at the weekends, and it doesn't rest. It doesn't.
No holiday.
Right. It doesn't need downtime. So you can transmit so much more data through a business, and then use the human resource for things that add a lot more value. So there's so much human resource tied up in menial things, and technology is gradually moving in and taking up the menial space, which is fantastic for business. Now, again, some of these solutions are still out of reach of some smaller organizations from a cost perspective, but the cost is coming down all the time. There are more and more solutions out there, and these RPA bot platforms are getting more and more cost effective. But it's another great example of technology that can either bring a deeper insight or bring an operational improvement to the way the business functions. I guess another area would be the fact that things are moving to the cloud, and this enables companies not to have to hold banks of servers, and they can leave all that to people like Google and tap into a cloud-based environment, which takes a lot of load off the business. Granted, it brings with it other problems like cybersecurity and those sort of things, but again, it can remove cost from a business. It can remove the IT or reduce the IT cost. So there's fundamental elements of technology that are now starting to make difference to business. And it's all part of this data-driven environment. You hear the terms industrial 4.0, and it's the latest industrial revolution. And the pick is that industrial 5.0 is actually circularity, because it's driven out of need of the fact that whether we like it or not, we're running out of raw materials.
Yeah.
And the other interesting about industrial revolutions is the gaps between them half each time, and the episode through the revolution also gets shorter. So really just before the turn of the century, I suppose, was the start of industrial 4.0, and it's probably only 30 years or so into the next one, which kind of feels right from a circularity perspective too. But this whole industrial 4.0 is given opportunity to have these data-driven systems, and given the global connectivity that's going on. And it's one of the things responsible for speeding up markets. The more that data gets connected, the faster decisions can be made from a market perspective, and therefore the faster companies need to be able to react to those changes. And people buying things have more buying power than they've ever had in history. And
Right.
somebody spend millions of dollars by pressing a button on their mobile phone while they're sipping their latte in a cafe. It's just incredible how the landscape's changed. But companies have to be able to deal with that, and therefore consultants have to be across that too, because they've got to help companies get insights into that space. So the technology is changing the business requirement as a consultant as much as it is changing the opportunity for business in the markets. Does that make sense?
For sure. And it's interesting that web's only headed into web 3.0. So it's one behind the industrial revolution, or maybe soon to be two behind if we wait around a few more years. But I knew that we wouldn't get through this short chat today without talking about AI, without talking about just the impact of artificial intelligence and business insight or intelligence in the data space or in the tech space.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, AI is used in a lot of places, of course, and operationally AI is used a lot for specific things, and especially robots and all the things like it. But AI is now starting to break into helping businesses run better businesses. And it's right at the beginning of that journey, mind you. It's very early days. And even in the robotic process space, the automated process space, there's very little AI as such. But those two things are definitely connected. And again, it's all about data. It's all about having good management of data and transmitting and understanding what's going on with business through looking at data, which is quite a different way of running a business. And if you think outside the corporations that have been wrestling with this stuff for years, and you come down a level where businesses, especially businesses that are still privately owned, for instance, businesses aren't listed, quite often the originators of that business are still in some way involved in decisions. And they've been successful thus far by their prowess in that market, and are very reluctant to let decision making go to data. Data is a very emotional way of running a business, which was what makes it so powerful, of course. And if you think back to the Motorola days and GE days of Six Sigma, that was all about taking a business problem, turning it into a mathematical problem, if you like, solving that problem, a statistical problem, I should say, solving that problem statistically, and then re-engaging that into the business. This is no different. It's an evolution, really.
It's the whole lean startup kind of lean canvas, process that you go through of let data be the decision maker, because the day of the gut insight, the intuition is, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but data is hard to dispute, the raw numbers. It's just a fascinating conversation today, Peter. And I want to wrap up today with just one interesting question. Let's just kind of step out of the tech side of things and just go back and put our consultant hat back on, our advisor hat. So when in your experience, you've gone into a company, maybe one of your consultants has gone into a company, do you sense that the business owners, when you talk to them about, using technology to help them make data-driven decisions, are they tied to the tech that they had before? I mean, is this another one of their, that's my baby, don't mess with my baby type thing? Or are they pretty open to transitioning? Are they just see the world around them changing so quickly?
That's a great question. Normally they're using some sort of data platforms anyway to run a business. Like every business has some sort of platform that it keeps its costs in, keeps its operational information in. What we normally find is the quality of the data is quite poor.
Mm,
So you can't, again, any of the technology I've talked to you about is of little use if the data isn't up to scratch. So normally the first exercise with the company is actually getting the data right, or understanding what data they need to make good decisions around the type of business they are, the type of customers they got, the type of market they're in. And if we spin this back to the learning curve of consulting, the learning out of this is to be advising in the new economy, you have to be able to give customers deeper insights than they currently have, and find a way to be able to attach them more closely in both in information and time to their markets. And you definitely need at your disposal either some access to experts that can do that, or some access to some technology and experts that can help you deliver that. You really have got a bit of a blind spot if you're hoping just to consult from your experience and aren't attached to any of that stuff, because that's where the market's moving. And I'm not suggesting right now it's the 80-20 rule. Probably 20% of smaller businesses are attached to technology in that way. But in 10 years' time, it's going to be the other way around, right? It's going to be 80%. So
yep.
you definitely better do that. The other thing that's changed is the realization of customers that markets are more dynamic and complex than they used to be, and are almost expecting those deeper insights. So they expect you to turn up and offer some insights they don't currently have, not just fix businesses.
Right. Right. Well, we're certainly headed into, I think it may be shorter than 10 years. I think you're being generous in your tenure to flip the 80-20, the Pareto principle for sure. But Peter, thanks again for chatting. What a great discussion today on the consulting curve, the community approach to clients and consulting. Peter, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Kevin. Great talk. Thank you.